Hello DSci 2000. In this video, I will be demonstrating how to turn a non-tidy dataset into a tidy dataset. To start, in D2L, I have posted a file called federalrd July 2020.xlsx. Please save this in your data files folder inside your DSci 2000 folder. So let's begin coding. Go to your DSci 2000 folder and open up the rproj file. Let's go ahead and create a new R script. Go to File, New File, and then R script. And let's hit Control S to save this in your Unit 3 folder. And let's just call it tidydata.r with an underscore between tidy and data. Let's save this. And let's also, just for good measure, go back to your DSci 2000 folder and add that file we just created to Git. So what we're going to do is we're going to right click the DSci 2000 folder, go to git bash here, and in the code file is in the unit 3 folder. So we're going to cd to unit 3, and then I'm going to do git add tidydata.r. And I'm just going to do an initial commit on this. So we've committed that file, and let's go ahead and start tidying up this data. To begin, if we look at our data file, we can see that its extension is xlsx. So far in this semester, you've learned how to read CSV files. I have not yet told you how to read xlsx files. To read an xlsx file, you need the readxl package in R. To use a package in R, remember, you have to install the package first. So let's do install.packages, and then in quotation marks, readxl. I'm going to put my cursor at the end of the line and press Control Enter to install that package. Then, if I scroll down to the console, I can see that the readxl package has been successfully installed. Now that I've installed the package, I'm going to go back up to my code. I don't need to install the package anymore, so I can just load the package using the library function. So I'm going to do library readxl. And then I'm going to press Control Enter to load the package. So we want to, in particular, load this federalrd July 2020.xlsx file. So one thing to remember is that our rproj file is in our DSci 2000 folder. The purpose of an rproj file is to tell R where your working directory is located. If your working directory is located in the DSci 2000 folder, what one needs to do is access the data files folder, and then in there, open the federalrd July 2020 xlsx file. So let's go ahead and do that in R. Let's call this data frame rd, and we will assign it, and rd will eventually be the data frame that is in that xlsx file. How you read an xlsx file after you've loaded the readxl package is read_xlsx. And remember, the working directory is based on where the rproj file is located. So in quotation marks, we need to tell R, go to the data_files folder. I'm going to put my cursor at the end of the line and press Control Enter. Now that I've pressed Control Enter, if I look on the right, I see that the RD data frame has been created. I'm going to click on it. And I'm going to scroll left. This is what the data frame looks like. Now to get an idea of what to do with this data frame, let's go to the data frame in the data files folder and open that xlsx file up. Now what's in this data? This is defense, non-defense, and total research and development spending from every fiscal year from 1976 all the way to 2020 if you were to go all the way to the right over there. We can see that for every fiscal year that there are 3 observations. There's defense spending for that fiscal year, non-defense spending for that fiscal year, and total spending for that fiscal year. I can see that there's defense ARRA and non-defense ARRA. If I scroll to the right, I can see that there's only 1 year where those appear, so I'm going to ignore those particular data points for now. So let's only focus on defense, non-defense, and total for now. Let's consider this value right here of 41.1. What is this representing? This is representing defense spending in 1976 in billions of dollars. So this 41.1 is uniquely identified by the fact that it is defense spending in 1976. Given that defense and 1976 are unique identifiers for that particular value, these three values should be in one row, which it is not, as you can see. We need to think about how to put those three values inside one row. Similarly, non-defense spending in 1976 is 40.8, as you see right here. This 40.8 is uniquely identified by the type of spending, non-defense, and the fiscal year, 1976. So those three values should also have their own row. Likewise, with total R&D spending in 1976, these three values should have their own row. And for 1977 as well, this 43.2 represents defense spending in 1977. So these three values should all be in one row. So now we've gotten an idea of what the final data set needs to look like. It probably needs to look something like this. I can imagine that we're probably going to have three different types of columns. We're going to have spending type, we're going to have a year, and we're going to have value. And spending type could be defense, non-defense, and total. And the year will start off with being 1976. With corresponding values, 41.1, 40.8, and 81.9. And we'll just logically extend this table out to every other fiscal year that is available in these data. So our goal is to essentially turn this entire Excel spreadsheet into a tidy structure like this. How do we go about doing this? Well, let's open up R. The first step you need to always take into account is that you want to make sure you get rid of whatever stuff is unnecessary for the final product. What is it that we don't need here? We only need the fiscal year, defense spending, non-defense spending, and the total. So that means that we could essentially just get rid of rows 1, 3, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11, and we would be okay. So how do we get rid of those rows? How you get rid of rows in a data frame in R, let's open up our tidy data code. Since we've read in our data frame RD, how you get rid of rows is by using negative indexes. So in this situation, we want to get rid of rows 1, 3, and then 7 to 11. So we need to make all of those row indexes negative. So here's how you do that. RD, bracket, put a negative sign in, then create a vector consisting of rows 1, 3, and then 7 to 11, which you recall you can simplify by just using this colon construction. And because these are row indices, I have to put a comma right after them. So this is going to be RD except with rows 1, 3, and 7 through 11 removed. And we want to just assign this to RD and get rid of the old RD variable. I'm going to go to the end of this line and hit Control Enter. And now if I open up the RD data frame, I can see that those rows are now gone. So the next thing we need to do is, now that we've stripped down our data frame to the bare essentials, we need to figure out how to turn these data into something more like this. So we need to turn this data into this. How do we go about doing that? I can see here that I'm starting off a data frame with 3 columns: spending type, year, and value. So let's go ahead and create a blank data frame with those 3 columns. How you do that, recall from the prior video, is as follows. I'm just going to call this data frame DF, and I'm going to assign it data.frame with 3 columns. Let's call them spending type. And we're going to make spending type a character variable. We're going to make, what are the other 2 columns? Year, a numeric variable, and value, a numeric variable. So let's add those columns to our data frame. And to run this code, just make sure you have your cursor on the same line where the variable is being assigned, and press Control Enter. And then if I scroll to the right, I can see that I've created a blank data frame, and if I click on DF, with 3 variables and no data available. This is the start of what our final data frame is going to look like. I'm going to close this up because I don't need that right now. And let's look at the Excel document again. So the first row is going to consist of the spending type right here, the year, and the value. Let's go to the R&D data frame in R. And let's look at where we're at right now. The first row is going to consist of this value right here. And it is uniquely identified by the year, which is right above it, and the spending type, which is to the left of it. And I'm going to have to do this for every other cell in this data. So let's start by constructing a loop of what this might look like. So I'm going to loop through every column. So I'm going to use J, because J is generally used for columns. And I'm going to say for J in 1 to the number of columns of RD, and start a loop right there. And I'm also going to loop through every row as well. So I'm going to say for I in 1 to n row RD. So now I have started constructing a loop for every column and for every row of this RD data frame. So I need to tell R, for example, that the first row needs to consist of defense 1976 and this value right here. The easiest way to do that would be to create a vector of those three variables and then combine them with the placeholder data frame. Let's go ahead and do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a variable called row, which will consist of the following. It's going to be a vector, so I'm going to initialize that using the C function. And the first value is going to be the spending type. The spending type is going to always be in the first column, regardless of what value you're looking at. Always going to be in the first column. So the first value inside this row vector is going to be RD in the first column. Look at whatever's in the corresponding row. And I, we're using to loop through rows, so I'm doing I, 1. So RD I, 1, when we're right here, is referring to in that particular row, which is I, look at the first column, and that will give you defense. The next thing I need is the year. I'm going to add to this vector by putting a comma and a space right there. And the next thing I'm going to do is, when I look at this particular value, the year is always in the first row, as we see right here. It's always in row 1. So I need to tell R that when you're in some cell over here, that you need to look at the same column, but the first row. So how you do that is you say RD, first row, and the corresponding column, which is going to be J. And lastly, you want the value itself. The value will just be the value in the ith row and the jth column. So I'm looking at my code right now, and I see I need to change this slightly. Because this is saying go from every row from 1 to the number of rows that there are. I only want it to go through rows 2 through 4. So this should actually be 2 to the number of rows. And similarly for the number of columns, I want it to skip the first column. So I'm just going to say 2 to the number of columns. Now next I got to make sure that this code works. So one good strategy for this is to choose a particular value of I and J, throw them into the console and test them out. So I'm going to, for example, right before this loop, I'm just going to assign I2 and J2. And I'm going to press Control Enter after both of those. And then on the right, you will see that I and J both have assigned values of 2. And then if I execute this code right here and I press Control Enter, I can see that row consists of 3 things. It has defense, 1976, and 41.10574. Which is great. That's exactly what I want. I want the spending type, I want the year, and I want the value. So I can see that this code is working exactly the way I want it to. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell R, take this vector and append it to that blank data frame I created earlier. Remember, the blank data frame is this data frame that has no data that consists of those 3 columns. I want to stick this row vector I've created into this data frame. How you do that, recall, is by using the rbind function. So now I'm going to make df the rbind of the old df and the new row. If I press Control Enter and I look at df, I can see that those values have been added to the data frame. The column names have been changed, unfortunately, and that's a problem we'll deal with in a little bit. So what have I done here? I have created a loop which says for each column from 2 to the number of columns, and for each row from 2 to the number of rows, create this vector with 3 components in it and stick it on the bottom of your data frame. Ideally, this should work no matter what column or row we're in the original data frame. Let's see if this works. I'm just going to start off by putting my cursor somewhere on the line where the loop begins. I'm going to press Control Enter. You can see here that it's complaining that names do not match previous names. I haven't really told you how to do this yet, but this is a problem I'll just fix over here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give each row a consistent name. So I'm going to say the names of row will just be the vector spending type, year, and value. And I'll make sure that this applies for every row. Let's go ahead and restart this. I'm going to delete the fixed I and j and execute this blank data frame again. And now let's execute this loop again. Control Enter. And we'll see if it works this time. It appears that it has. And let's go to our data frame. We can see indeed that we have now created a tidy version of that data set. So that there is the general process of how you turn a non-tidy data set into a tidy data set. You have to read in the file, kind of toss out anything that you don't need, create a blank placeholder data frame, and then run through loops using two-dimensional indexing, making sure that your names are consistent for every single row, and you just R-bind your rows beneath the placeholder data frame. Just for good measure, I'm going to get rid of the row vector just so that it's not hogging my memory. I'm going to press Control Enter. And what else is it that I don't need here? I don't need RD, I don't need I, and I don't need J anymore. And now let's test to make sure this code works. Remember how you restart your code is as follows. You go to Session, Restart R, then you go to the brush over here, clear everything from the workspace, and then you select all using Control A, then use Control Enter to run your code. And if all works well, this should give us the data frame that we want, which is exactly there. Let's click on DF. So this is exactly what we want, which is the tidy version of that original data set. So again, just to review how this works, you read in the file, you toss out anything you don't need, you create a blank placeholder data frame, and then you loop through every relevant row and column, create a vector with names that are identical for each vector, and then you stack those on top of the placeholder data frame using rbind. And then at the end, you just remove whatever it is that is irrelevant from your memory, just for good measure. I'm going to go ahead and save this code. And I'm going to go to my DSci 2000 folder, go back to git bash, I'm just going to commit this. And I'll push it. And that there is how you turn a non-tidy data set into a tidy data set.